Welcome to our Wednesday night service. We're going to continue with our series on looking at the book of Revelation. And I know that there are many questions, and Revelations is sometimes difficult to unwind. So we want to take some time tonight just to take a look at the latter part, the beginning of the great judgments that occur, to see what we can see and see what has interest to you. Please, if you have questions, if email me, text me if it's a short one, talk to me, whatever, so we can exchange ideas and make sure that we're thinking alike, because it is a very intense and sometimes confusing book. Before I forget now, we have a men's breakfast this Saturday. We start at 8 o'clock. Evan Wolf will be here, and Evan has done a lot of work on the models that concern the coronavirus. So he's going to come and explain some of that to us, and I think it will help to perhaps put things in a better light, and to make sure that everybody's perhaps got just a better knowledge of it. And we're pleased and happy to have someone who's dealt with it. If y'all would, if you have your Bibles, turn to Revelation chapter 8. Revelation 8, verse number 1. We'll start and pick it up there. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now I know that in times past, we can't do this today, but in times past we'd always say, that's the way you know there's no women in heaven, because there's a space of quiet for half an hour. Of course today, that's you can't do that, and shouldn't have then, but it's kind of an interesting verse because it tells us something is coming that is going to be very intense. Now remember, everything that we're doing here, everything that's been given so far has been given by Christ to John for the believers. If you look back at Revelation chapter 1, he's talking to the people who lived then, and he is very clear to make sure that he understands, that we understand it's also for us. This is not a book that you cannot figure out, but it's a book that takes some study and some time. And this one is one that begins to say to us, there's a seal that's going to be opened here, the seventh seal on that scroll. We have a scroll that's got 7 seals on it. This is the last one. When it's opened, there's a lot of things that begin to happen, including the fact that we would be raptured. And the wrath of God is going to start, and there's a series of events that will take place after this that are on the earth are terrible. It's the beginning of a new earth. It's the beginning of an earth that has been cleansed by fire, and it's the beginning of a new rule by Christ himself here on earth. It's also a rule by men, women who have been resurrected from their tomb, from their graves, and have been given new bodies that we might perform in a different way and be placed back on the earth. The earth belongs to Christian people. The earth belongs to Christian people. That's an important concept. And although we're not part of the environmental group, we're also responsible for it. So he says here, and I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Now he's looking here and picturing the tabernacle of the wilderness, or the temple that was in Jerusalem, and with the altar of incense on it. It would have the menorah in it. It would have the table of showbread. And most of all, I think that from Revelation chapter 11, we see that the Ark of the Covenant is there and been kept safe. Jeremiah didn't remove it. God took it out, and it's just strange, and it just disappears suddenly. But in Revelation, it says it's back in heaven. So we know we've got 7 angels coming. There are 7 trumpets. And kind of the question that comes up here, and what's important, is to say, where are we at this point? Well, when this 7th seal is open, we're gone. And we're going to go through this a bit slower here, because I think it's important that you recognize that the importance of this to us. Somebody told me not too long ago, why study it? We can't interpret it. Well, one, we can't interpret it, okay? It was given to men for us to interpret. Chapter 1 says there's a blessing in doing it. Secondly, yeah, I know, sometimes it's confusing, but it's well worth digging, because you know what? If what we see is exactly what personally I think it is the beginning of sorrows, the beginning of the birth pangs, then it's time to get ready. And that's not a time we're going to have a lot of time to do what we need to do. This is the time we have to be ready. There's some lots of questions. I think one of them was really answered for me last week about whether we fight or flee before the Antichrist. And we'll talk about that later, but it's an important question because I think we face it. By the way, the early church writers thought we faced it. And that's it, you know, that's a real key. There's a man that's given, his name is Irenaeus. He wrote a book called Against Heresies, and part of that is he gives the answer to prophecy. Now, Irenaeus' teacher was a man by the name of Polycarp. Polycarp was a man who was a bishop in the church, or a pastor if you want to look at him that way. He was very, very famous. He is the best known of the early martyrs. But Polycarp's teacher was John, the apostle. And what you see in Revelation further down is that John is given certain information. He's told not to write it down. He's told to seal it. What he's not told is don't talk about it. He's not told that. But he is told don't write it down. And it is said by Irenaeus, by other men, that John did talk to Polycarp about it, and it gives information that really fills in the blanks here. And one of those is, like we see tonight, the two witnesses. And the early church fathers were almost 100% of saying that the two witnesses are Enoch and Elijah. One represents the church. He's a Gentile. He's not a Jew. He's a Gentile. And the other is Elijah, who is a Jewish prophet. So one represents the Gentiles, the other, the Jews, and they're linked together. They are there for 3.5 years. And then they're killed by the Antichrist at that point, and they do die, and their bodies lay in Jerusalem for 3.5 years. You know, sometimes when you look at, remember that Jerusalem is a city that has always been guilty of killing the prophets. And many of them have died, many prophets have been killed, virtually all of them, in fact, have been killed in Jerusalem. Jeremiah's exception, there's a couple of others. But Jerusalem is really called Sodom, spiritually speaking, because it's always been one that throws off the truth, even though it has access to it. Now, the big thing I want you to get out of this, though, is if the early church fathers had certain views, and they didn't change until 1850, is something wrong here? Were they wrong for all that whole period of time? Did they misinterpret Scripture for that whole period of time? Yeah, they were part of what we would call the Roman Church, but this day and time, or in the day and time that the Irenaeus lived, that church was not what we think of it today at all. It was going to get thrown off track another couple of hundred years, but right now it's pretty solid. Yep, you've seen this slide before, and it's a slide that lets us represent some things. And the arrival of the two witnesses, it says is here at the midpoint. Let me just tell you, I don't think they get here at the midpoint. I think they arrive right back here at the beginning. And I say that so that you recognize and realize what God would do by bringing in those two witnesses here early. He is condemning the world. For us to see two men who suddenly just show up out of nowhere, and they begin to preach a message, and it's not one of love, it's one of there's wrath coming. And they are rejected by the world and almost in its entirety. Understand, this message is one that although they see the truth, the world sees the truth presented to them, it does all these things, it still completely just rejects what the message is. Let me pull one thing out here that I think you need to understand. If you're looking at this point before, this is a 7-year period, it goes from here all the way down to here. If you're looking at that 7-year period here, be sure that you understand if it's really a pre-trib rapture, it has to occur out here before this starts. But somewhere, somehow, the Antichrist has to be already in existence and acknowledged sometime really early here. If the rapture occurs out here somewhere, there's a time frame in there that's just kind of lost. And nobody can explain it. And everybody tells me there's no signs before that pre-trib rapture. But I know that I think we're looking at the signs, even as we see our nation coming apart at the seams, it seems like. And I think you need to acknowledge we're going to face the Antichrist and face his wrath. So these two witnesses arrive actually here, and here they're killed and they're raptured or taken back into heaven bodily. And I'm sure that God at that point takes care of all of the aches and pains these two guys have. They must have lots of aches and pains if one of them's 3,000 years old and the other one's good 2,500. So Elijah has been seen before by the apostles on the Mount of Transfiguration. Enoch has done a lot of writing, very popular in his writings. But actually we're down to the trumpet judgments given here by this beginning of this red line here. You've got 7 trumpets that are going to be blown. So let's just kind of cover some of them before we go too much further. The first trumpet, Revelation 8:7, the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burned up, and all green grass was burned up. A third part of the world just becomes desolate. It becomes, I guess you'd call it like the Sahara Desert. It's suddenly just destroyed. Revelation 8:1-6 says, in the prologue, silence in heaven, the golden censer, the incense, and the prayers of the saints from the altars, that's what constitutes what's being thrown on the earth and burning it up, destroying it. And it's got to be a devastating type thing, because now you have no farmland, you have no pasture land, we have no way of living that we would know it to be very well. And it's the beginning of of Lord's wrath actually beginning on the earth here. First trumpet also, and their first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And must have hit the last, no, there it is. 2 of the plagues which are shown here are those plagues out of Egypt. And they had been mingled here together, and they're cast down with blood. By the way, blood does what to the land? It's going to make it unusable for a while. And it's also a testimony to the world as to the wrath and how God is looking at things. Remember, if those 2 witnesses have been there for 3.5 years, the world has seen what they've done. They are there in sackcloth. They're not there in 3-piece suits. They've got a message of wrath. They're saying that they're men that have existed for, in Elijah's case, it's over 4,000 years. Not Elijah, Enoch's case, over 4,000 years. So they know the name, they know who he is, they know who Elijah is. More importantly, the Jews, Christians, and people like that know exactly who they are. And they understand that what's being delivered here is a judgment, a message of pure judgment. Is it symbolic or reality? Well, 2 Peter chapter 3 tells us very firmly that this is a real, not symbolic, but a real judgment that befalls the earth here. Don't make Revelation symbolic. All of a sudden you get into an attitude where you can make it say anything you want to. It's not symbolic. It is also, let me say, not in a chronological order. This is an area where you kind of come up to the 7th, or the trumpets, but you've already, or the seals rather, I should have said, where the seals are, but they have already been opened, but there's a place where Revelation goes back and gives more explanation on it. We do that when we write. We write and we come back and fill in some blanks. That's exactly what occurs in Revelation 2. The second trumpet, and the second angel sounded, as it were a great mountain burning with fire, was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. And I think this is something that begins to happen very quickly. Now, the blood, you can say, well, it's a meteor, it's a comet, something like this. But the blood would say it's more than that. And I think that's why the blood is there. And there's two reasons. One is, of course, the blood of Christ, which has been pushed away. They have rejected the blood of Christ and its protection. So he says, I'll send you blood. You'll have blood. Secondly, also, it says, this is a miracle which you cannot put down in a natural sense. Because comets, meteors, whatever it may be, do not have that. Super volcano could be a meteor, could be any number of things. But whatever it is, and I think personally it's a meteor of some sort rather than a super volcano. But we have several super volcanoes that we know of. 2 of them are in the United States. Either one would devastate the entire continent if it were to go off. This case, because it hits the sea, I'm really tempted to say it's a meteor. Third trumpet, and the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now what he's looking at here, these are the rivers. This is drinking water. This is water that you cannot survive without. Here in El Paso, we're aware of this, and we have water that's underneath the earth, but we also depend on that river water. I know sometimes it looks like it's a little creek run down there, but it's actually got a lot more water than what we see in the open here, and it's one that if it were to dry up or be gone, here in El Paso, we would be in trouble, in a major hurry. The effects of it, okay, it's a meteor, maybe, which affects the inland water. Make sure that you understand, it's not the ocean. Wormwood is actually something which is used as a poison or medicine. The freshwater destruction, as we said, would be devastating. Let me just tell you, the Russian word for wormwood is Chernobyl. And that's what makes me think perhaps there's something linked here to something nuclear. I would say after hearing in the past few months of what Russia is planning to do in the sea, perhaps it is something that someone sets off. But more than that, I think it's something God does. It is not something man does. It is something God does to make sure that we understand and know that this is a judgment from God. It is burning as it were a lamp. In the chapter of the star, we read that this is actually coming from the Quran. And the Quran and the Bible here have certain things that are very similar. I would say that the Quran has lifted it from the scriptures, from the Word of God, and made them or changed them to where they fit theirs. But in the chapter of the star, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The lightness of his light is a mishkat, a niche, in which is the lamp. The lamp is in a glass. And the glass is it were brightly shining star from the Quran, 24. Compare this with Revelation 8:10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of water. I think this is where the Quran, and make no mistake about it, all of this, and it's given in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, were finished long before the Quran was written. In fact, the scriptures were finished before 100 AD. Don't let anybody fool you, and don't let your some of the footnotes that are given in some of your Bibles turn you aside. The Bible was finished before 100 AD and done. So the Quran comes along and borrows it. But it also, some other things that are in the Quran, which we'll see later, would indicate to us they know that there's a time of wrath coming. This is by coincidence the monument and memorial to what happened at Chernobyl. And notice what they've used is an angel with a trumpet. It's extremely fitting. And it's only 85 miles from the national capital of the Ukraine, Kiev, and one that has devastated the Ukraine and other countries around it. How long have we gone?
19 minutes.
So is this a coincidence, or is this somebody that knew the scriptures and did this? The fourth trumpet, the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld and an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. So what he's looking at and saying here, again, it's dark. You know, darkness is something we fear. I keep a little pin light, and I have to have it both during the day and the night anymore, but I keep that little pin light because I want to have something handy if the lights go out, something happens, I want to be able to see. And it's not a great light, but it's light. And you know, I said the same way, when things begin to get dark, especially in this particular case, and you think the world would recognize and say, God's angry. I mean, it would seem logical, but they don't. They really don't. Even here where the sun begins to die down. And of course the moon logically would die down. And the stars also. There's some interesting work that's been done on the stars. And it's now being said by mathematicians and physicists that there is a way that God could have put the stars out there the way that he did, like a sheet it says, and the light would have gone from the earth to the star immediately within seconds, because there's always a contradiction that is said to be in the Bible, and really there's not. Gee, we just didn't have the knowledge that we have today. The effects, well, third part of the sun, moon, what happens? I don't know. You know, this is way beyond my pay grade. Maybe the earth changes position. Something occurs. We're talking here lately of the North Pole, or the magnetic pole, shifting more and more towards Siberia. It was moving at a very slow rate. Now it's accelerated towards over 25 or 30 miles a day, or kilometers per day. And it's shifting. It looks like if it goes much further, that the Earth poles will be reversed. Now, nobody's really sure what happens in this case, but is it possible that the Earth poles do shift? We're already seeing it, you know, seeing the effects of it, which are minimal right now. We can get around it, but if they should flip over, we're not sure what would occur, what would happen. One is you don't want to be flying the Atlantic when it occurs, because right at that point, that plane is now lost. What part of the Earth? Well, I don't know. How dark? How dark? You know, it's interesting to note that the darkness that occurred after Christ died, there's indications it covered the entire world. We have writings in the Indian culture, the Mayan culture. Aztecs wrote about it. They wrote about it in Russia. They wrote about it in different places. And it's just a way of saying it's all through the earth. It wasn't just a local thing. And by the way, it's not an eclipse. Most of you have seen an eclipse because we've had several. An eclipse lasts for a short period of time, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours.